Okay, hello. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along to this second lecture for Thinking Literature of the Day. It's really nice to see you all, and I'm really excited about this one, especially, I think I mentioned that already this morning, but I'm going to say it again. So I'm really flummoxed with delight that today we're going to have a reading from her own work by the wonderful poet Kate Francis, who also has said that she will answer questions if anybody has them. I hope that you do have them. I've been emphasising to my group that it's essential that we all come with questions, so hopefully people will have them. Please don't feel shy either, because it'll be really, really interesting, I'm sure, to Kate and to everybody in the room to hear any questions that you do have, whether you've formed them yet in your head or not. So what's going to happen now then is I'm going to first of all briefly introduce Kate to you all and say a few things about her poetry, and in particular the poem that she is about to read for us, which is 1, 2, 3, right? Yeah, so if you have there the selection from Kate's new book, which is on canvas in front of you, then it is the second to last poem included in that selection there, the one that's the long one titled 1, 2, 3. That's the one that I'm going to talk about a little bit. And then I'm going to hand over to Kate, who will give us a reading from this book, I think, of that poem. And then we should have, hopefully, plenty of time left for a Q&A. So the second half, or however much is left of this 50 minutes, will be over to you all. And I'll stand here and help make that happen. Okay, so I thought I'd start with this slide here, really just to pick up from more or less where we left off this morning, in my uppity and dyspeptic lecture about Don Patterson and his lonely furrow. And I spoke then a little bit about what seemed to me this very impoverished kind of disciplinarian concept of symbolism, which Don Patterson had expounded in his lecture online, where the symbols just sort of naturally fall into the slots already prepared for them by social reality. And the business of the poet, who doesn't want to overstep the mark or to go too far, is simply to direct the reader's attention to what is already manifest in the relations between objects, so that the reader, as Patterson says elsewhere, is supposed to nod and say, yes, that's how it is. So the reader is effectively reduced in this vision of interpretation to a kind of nodding dog. In any case, something much more exciting and wild is happening in the poetry which we are about to hear today. And here are a few of the objects which will be more or less bizarrely related to and will appear and pop up in the poems that we're going to hear today. So, no llama in this lecture, but we do have giblets, which is I've given you in cartoon form in case the real one would have been a bit much for anybody. Anyhow, let's go back to the beginning. So, Kate Francis then, as I mentioned this morning, is a poet who, excuse me, I don't know what that is currently a student studying for an MA here at the University of Sussex. She has a book out already before this one, from which we're going to hear a poem today, which is called Daydream Erotica, and here is the press, from which I urge you all to order a copy of it. So that's Broken Sleep Books, there it is. So go there, have a look. They've published many, many books, really interesting stuff. So this is the kind of small press that I mentioned fleetingly this morning, before piling on to presses like Faber, etc. So there are many of these small presses. And these really are the kind of corners of culture where the most interesting and vital stuff is happening, I think. And for all sorts of reasons. The whole machinery of editing and marketing and preparation for commerce that inevitably exists in presses like Faber and Penguin and Picador, etc., simply doesn't exist in presses like this. And not only does it not exist, but the entire culture of these kinds of presses is just fundamentally antithetical to that whole style of preparation for the market which exists in bigger presses. So this is just one press, one example of a place that you could go to and look to find some of the kinds of things that I was describing earlier this morning. I'm going to talk now about just 3 little excerpts from Kate's poem that we'll hear in order to sort of identify for you a number of questions that you might think about as you hear Kate read, or themes that could pop up for us in the Q&A, though certainly they don't have to. We can go wherever anyone likes with the Q&A. But one thing I think I thought I would mention is, first of all, that this is powerfully rhythmical verse. So, we've had a week in this lecture series already about metre, and though it would be a bit of a stretch to describe this poem by Kate as categorically a metrical poem, because it doesn't work straightforwardly at all points within a single metrical set, such as, for example, iambic pentameter, or blank verse, which is in some of the poems that we've studied. Nonetheless, at the level of the movement between one line and the next, at the more intricate and detailed passages of versification from one line into the next, there are many identifiable metrical units scattered through this poem, broken up and fragmented, more or less disintegrated. And in particular, there are many lines with a powerfully sprung dactylic rhythm. So a dactyl, you may know from that earlier lecture, is a three-syllable foot, ba-ba-ba, 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 like that. It's a very compulsive, propulsive kind of triple metre. And you can hear it here, sweating and swelling that threatens, or splitting and thumbing compulsions. And a lot of this poetry springs forward like this with runs of dactyls, very often in trimetrical lines, in 3-beat lines. But there also are, tucked and folded in this poetry, examples of other metrical units which have been snapped off and redistributed across line endings, such as, for example, the shore that holds the raucous tides of I, which would be, I'm sure everyone can hear that, an iambic pentameter, the shore that holds the raucous tides of I, but for the fact that these last two little syllables here have been stranded on the line below, as if someone had come along and imposed a margin on them or a limit on their movement. So you can hear all sorts of intricate rhythmical, musical and metrical patterns moving throughout the poem. This is one thing that I think it's really good to know, so that you can listen out and hear the poetry, the music, when we hear it in a moment. Another is that this is a poetry which is clearly much preoccupied, both intellectually preoccupied but also musically and in some more inchoate and indescribable sense, just anxiously preoccupied with the inhabitation of the first-person pronoun I, what it means to be able to speak one's own existence, what it means to be able to construct a grammar of self-identification. And this poem, as you can see here, very graphically, is often pushing out, reaching, as it were, towards a kind of I that it can grab hold of, but then perhaps slips through its fingers, or it must let go of. Perhaps it drops it because it's suddenly too hot, or the wrong shape. So you'll see lots of these I's threaded throughout the poem, and it's helpful to see here how they're almost like hitting the return key at this point in the poem, at least. They are what activate and or enact the moment of enjambment, or turning around. The poetry folds itself over by naming, with its pronoun, the agency which creates it. So, the deep and dripping scores of living, dancing lonely in the dark, coming, I, it coming, I, vulgar, vital, furling, I, it is coming, I, dizzy and unknown. And just one more passage. Here is a passage in which we have what we might call, and we can explore this thought later if we'd like to, bizarre objects. And I use that phrase, bizarre objects, I take because it comes from the work of the psychoanalyst Wilfred Bion. It's a figure I'm very much interested in. And Bion described how when what he called the psychotic part of the personality, that does not necessarily mean a person who must be classed as psychotic, but the psychotic part of the personality, which exists in everyone and in all of us, sometimes can rise up to the top of consciousness and so overwhelm our feelings that we feel suddenly as though the objects around us have taken on bizarre aspects and are behaving in bizarre ways. And this can create potentially a very powerful form of symbolism in poetry, to pick up that thread from earlier today. But rather than the symbols all just falling into the slots already allocated for them by social reality, instead, poetry can itself be a very complicated and spontaneous improvisatory form of symbol formation. So we'll find out what is symbolic, what has the potential to mean what, by doing it. And here are just a few examples of some odd objects that pop up. So the reverence, hope, utter the softest giblet of comfort, hope, a filament forest in a shoebox from the corner of our mutual eye. Hence, here we go. There they all are, these objects. We might come back to this later if anyone is interested, but there is, in any case, for you to review on the recording on Canvas if you'd like to. There is a moment in which Bion speaks about bizarre objects. So just one more thing to flag up before I hand over to Kate, is that this preoccupation, this sort of search for an eloquent eye, an eye who can speak in the poem and who can feel real, who can properly bring into presence the person whose poem this is, has a kind of poetic tradition behind it. And I know from my interest in Kate's poetry that a couple of figures have been particularly important for her in her own thinking about this question about the eye, one of whom is the great Russian poet Vladimir Mayakovsky, who, very famous poem from 1915, A Cloud in Trousers, and these are not continuous lines, they're just excerpts from different moments in this poem. As he says here, I'll be tender as you please, not a man but a cloud in trousers. I am where pain is everywhere. I hang crucified on every tear of your flood of tears. Trying really radically to explode the idea of selfhood and to let its fragments or its debris redistribute themselves in a kind of whirlwind of passion and just see where they end up. So I ends up as pain, ends up hanging from tears, ends up in the sky, it ends up all over the world. And another example, again from a poet that I know Kate admires, Frank O'Hara, himself very much influenced and inspired by Vladimir Mayakovsky, but O'Hara was an American poet. He really hit the gas and tried to see how far he could speed off into the wilderness with this idea of the radical redistribution of selfhood or of self-identification. So as you can see, he just really goes for it here in a poem that he wrote for himself as a kind of study of his own present existence in life on the occasion of his 30th birthday in 1956, in memory of my feelings. I am a Hittite in love with a horse. I don't know what blood's in me. I feel like an African prince. I am a girl walking downstairs, etc. It goes on and on and on. I. Until the I begins to take on a really bizarre and amorphous kind of existence in the poem, or on the contrary, to seem just like a space of exchangeability or fungibility through which any form of identity can circle or circulate, a bit like the interchangeability that we spoke about this morning. Anyhow, there are lots of I's in this poem that we're going to hear. What then is this poem doing with the I, which is different from, and it clearly is different from, these earlier poems, which have a kind of heroic orotund register. They are speaking from a centre of potentially or ironically heroic authority very often. What's happening in Kate's poems that relates to this or is different from it? Okay, so that's just a very brief introduction to the reading that we're now going to hear. So I'll hand over to Kate.
Hi. Thanks very much for having me and being here. And yeah, I'm just going to get straight to it. So this is 1, 2, 3. So some holy interference, humming and breaching ground, some golden faint of God, the endless toss in long, shy whispers, sure. Voicing drops to the distance, lanced of its loathing, its own, love restored to cadences, the day reeling off once more, melting under the sill of the window, wilting warmth to graze each fibre, stubborn slipping as if to sleep, down with the day, the dirty living years, the only coming waiting, blindly for the third and final pulse, blindly cradled in choral uproar, softly behind the eyelid, and ever arch in ill-humoured reckoning. What else could it have been? To dissolve it upon the granite turning third in the world as known, a testimony, ladybird skull of living. The score, stretching across the viaduct, in the saddest webbing hues, that I, so deeply in this skin, scored so deeply the body. Taking in the ovum, as anything other your twistings, but a child's voice, happy, in the voice of a child, again, happy. Snap to, undripping your fear from the saddlebags, saving you from nothing, scabbing upon the floor, you, finger outstretched, reach ever free of consummates, nor turning again find a different spot to steady, scabbing upon the carpet, scoring the memory curds, scored, I, splitting, to dreaming skin and remnants, baiting a paper cut, edging taut the space, flayed and loving gathered, pathos by Caesarean, sweating and swelling that threatens the breach, peel away, the shore that holds the raucous tides of I. Fear the snag in the skin, thumbing my fear, splitting and thumbing compulsion, my fear, flaying my dear and blossoming fear, a play with the coarseness, the rough edges, and ever incumbent. But there you were, I watching you, humming and swaying to the mother of all my feeling, a step to the left, joined in perfection you and the sighing blue, the sea and the wilting sky, joined by your figure without me, rooted and reaching without end between the sea and the sigh that supplants the touch of the finger, the sighing age of untouchable sky, a little to the left, in everything without. In one blue moment, gently, the riddling, the final and gentle diffusion, deep in the blue and held there in hail tension, whilst you slip, further and dimly to the humming, swaying rhythm of what is mine, the warmth in between the teeth, indigo and curling ashen out against the golden scores of rain, and it is raining, because I, the brutish child, declared it. Humming and swaying, crying the songs that usher my birth, my coming resurrection, coming, singing depth without cessation, with the heaving sighs of the tide, otherly coming in the violet rain, the shape I to myself, myself unto an I, in the rolling world of declaration, making mother. Clouds and their scores, beauty stumped at the heights, precarity and whirling on, its heel calling you, with all the thunder, the eclipse of the air conditioning, pervert to the silence of which I am fortified, the pesto that holds my tender and toasted apologies. Every glance will proffer a scrap, strewn across the English hills, 1,000 flapping pieces of life, a skin upon your land, a flaking skin upon your milk, as I saw it, delighted by you and your impish delight, making mantle of your duty. My affection for peaches, the same but twisting, grimacing with the tears of a child, twisting when the world, whole, snaps inward, coiling back to the glasses and the ashtray, aching with joy, the peach drips upon the world, whole, joyously tears for the peach. Unsoiled and best held in silence, my secret pining affection for that which slips from granted to cherish, rampant as the days, revelling harder with each, the napalm memory embryo taking with itself, in safer mould, a kinder frame, groggy and each issue the first, where peonies are the palms of a friend, soft and piping proud with love, each turning waking revolution, strangers in the bottom drawer, my child in the smell of jasmine, the cracking cornerstones, lost in the comfort discharging, reaching out with a finger. Is this where the treacle ends, where hard green words are lonely? Cruel and deafened reignition, rumbling hope renewed. There is still no suspicion of your A-boards as prophet, only hushing the shore, in morning resolution of living, the deep and dripping scores of living, dancing and lonely in the dark, coming I, it coming vulgar vital furling I, it is coming I, dizzy and unknown, only in third, rolling through the dark, stubborn against all longing, shaping the waves that have come and are coming. Not, never, no, the sky, crossed out in 1,000 white and plastic places, soaring lord of my private salvation, my purple welts. The score 1,000 times renewed, in 1,000 shredded glances, 1,000 rebel joys sprouting from the crinkled skin of Can, mustering and crying out against every cruel and binding nature, you turning a final time to the flowers framed on the desk, how you to cry sepulchre, to eject your degradation, how young to cry out catacomb, to the touchable half of Janus, the mist at the end of the street, to release the word of hope, the reverence hope, utter the softest giblet of comfort hope, a filament forest in a shoebox from the corner of our mutual eye. The blue, young and undeterred, underbelly striped in fury, calling the world into being, harbour denial in the drifting suds, for the wax that runs and pearls upon itself, the clattering valley breath upon the flame. Irretrievable, and the truth of the petulant morning. There is no choir of images to hold you, you the nighttime skimmer, dodging the wallops of the flattening world, but to the headland of ourselves, ships, darkly and silent. But steady, deep and dancing joy, mine and made the blue will burst within itself, imperceptible and mustering. Bursting and endless repiled, purling under the relentless sea, I unto myself, purling under the blue, purling under all, purling under I, purling under and into and unto, purling in sweetness, purling, heaving deeply and with cadence in the fingers, pearl the voices and rhythms of living and know them unending, coming without end to go on, humming and swaying without ever words for its end, gripped, thumbed in the deep blue hand, thumbing and purling the roughness of its coming. But peach in peach the bursting swell, feeble blushing tear against its coming, thrown up on the grass, north at Zira, south at Zira, the deep and longing score of the shore, whirling in bulbous joy, hushing for sleep and rocking peach, peel, hush, back, rocking peach, hush, German bite. Say the silence is not it, biting the eye to itself, scored in the face of a silence, defying its own and bastard hope. The deep blue world burst and swelling again, dissolving its coda, labouring under the drunken word, too close and reckless to close, aborted and deeply blue to grow again, burst in technicolor, my mad and coming blue. The smell of the flowers dying burst, and the book on the nightstand swell, and the distant dying public night in all its glory burst, Humber, the father to a radish, the third and tardy coming, the shape of looming eye, swelling and bursting blue, the hushing coming tides of eye, the full and endless joyous turn, unending over the sea. Thanks.